We're going to go ahead and get started. It's 2:30. Thank you all for your patience and waiting and for getting started. For those of you that don't know or need it for purposes of the record, my name is Jeff Getting. It's Getting. I am the Kalamazoo County Prosecuting Attorney. We're here today to review my decision regarding the Brandon Alexander Stacy officer-involved shooting that took place on March 12 of 2019. First, I want to extend my sympathy and condolences on behalf of myself, the Office of the Prosecuting Attorney, the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, and all of law enforcement to Mr. Stacy's family and loved ones. Losing a person from your family, losing a loved one is a very difficult thing, and I know that none of this has been easy for them. Second, before we get into this a little bit more, I want to express my admiration for the employees at the Biomat USA. What happened on March 12th was very out of the ordinary, to understate it. Their reaction was really incredible, not only looking out for each other, but looking out for the customers that were there when this occurred. They acted with great bravery, and that needs to be noted as well. So Tuesday, March 12, 2019 at approximately 11:30, actually 11:28 a.m., officers from the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety were dispatched to the Biomat Plasma Center. That business is located here in the city of Kalamazoo, County of Kalamazoo, State of Michigan. It's at 167 East Kalamazoo Avenue in downtown Kalamazoo. The dispatch was because an employee of Biomat, Brandon Alexander Stacy, had entered the business. He stayed in the lobby area of the business. He was armed with a handgun. He pulled that gun, fired one shot into the ceiling, and told employees to call 911. Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety were the first on the scene. Two officers, Public Safety Officer Brendan Westrick was first there. Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety Officer Emily Wesson was the second officer to arrive on the scene. Those two officers entered the lobby area of the Biomat Plasma Center, where they were confronted by Mr. Stacy, who pointed his gun directly at PSO Westrick and PSO Weston, and there was gunfire then exchanged. We'll get into the details of it a little bit more. I'm going to show you some of the evidence from the scene, including video, or at least some of the video from the scene, as well as some of the physical evidence. An autopsy was performed on Mr. Stacy at the Western Michigan University Homer Stryker Medical School. It was performed by Dr. Elizabeth A. Douglas. Her conclusion was that Mr. Stacy's death was caused by multiple gunshot wounds. She concluded the manner of death was homicide. Mr. Stacy suffered 4 separate gunshot wounds, one to his left thigh, one to his right thigh, one to the right chest area, one to his left chest area. 3 of those shots, both of the shots to the legs as well as the shot to the left chest, were through and through. The bullets entered from the front, traveled to the rear, and entered from his back, or the back of his leg. 1 bullet was recovered during the autopsy from the right chest area. That bullet was subsequently seized, turned over to the Michigan State Police as evidence in the case. With regard to Mr. Stacy, whenever we have incidents like this, we look back at each of the persons involved to see whether or not there was something that was going on that led up to this incident. A subsequent check of the Law Enforcement Information Network, or LEAN system, revealed that Mr. Stacy has no prior criminal history. The gun that was used in this incident belonged to Mr. Stacy. It had been lawfully purchased from a business in Kalamazoo in 2015. The gun is a Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The magazine for that gun holds 16 rounds. You can also have an additional round chambered in the weapon for a total of 17. Mr. Stacy has a history of mental and emotional difficulties. We're aware of at least 2 prior suicide attempts before March 12th. The most recent known attempt occurred less than a month prior to March 12th, happened on or about February 18th, 2019, at Biomat USA, and had resulted in him being referred for assistance by the employees at Biomat. We also know that this was a particularly difficult time for Mr. Stacy. We have interviewed multiple people who are friends, family members of his, as well as seized his phone and reviewed the electronic information contained within that phone. What I'm going to tell you is simply that information contained multiple references to suicidal thoughts, both personal and the electronic information. He also was having difficulties in his family life, culminating in having been asked to move out of the marital home earlier that day on March 12th. Getting more into the details of what happened on March 12th, on that day, Mr. Stacy entered the business. He wasn't scheduled to work there. Shortly before 11:30 a.m., he was an employee at the time. He entered the lobby area. He went into a men's bathroom, came out, pulled this 9mm handgun, pointed it at the ceiling, fired 1 round, told the employees to call 911. He remained armed, kept the weapon in his hand during the entirety of the time until officers from the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety responded. 11:30 on a Tuesday, Biomat USA is open for business. There were dozens of people in there, including employees and customers. One of the 911 callers had estimated that there was between 50 and 60 people present in the business at that time. The Biomat USA business, as you will see, is equipped with high-resolution cameras, security cameras. They record video. They do not record audio. There is one that recorded this incident in the lobby area of the building. It's aimed from behind Mr. Stacy towards the doors that were entered by PSOs Westrick and Weston. The gun that Mr. Stacy was armed with, as I said earlier, is a Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic handgun. It had been purchased in 2015. 16-round magazine, an additional round that can be chambered. On March 12th, the gun was loaded with those 16 rounds. The gun had, Mr. Stacy had retrieved the gun from a family member where it was being kept for safekeeping. His family had decided that it wasn't safe for the gun to be in Brandon's home, so a family member was holding it. That morning, Brandon went, spoke to the family member, said that he was going to be target shooting later in the day, and took the gun as well as 2 fully loaded magazines and a box with additional ammunition. This is what a 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun looks like. This is Mr. Stacy's gun. It is not currently loaded, obviously. Magazine for that gun, along with the rounds of ammunition that were left in the magazine after this incident was completed. After the 911 calls have been made, Mr. Stacy stays in the lobby area of the business. He remains in a place where he has a clear line of sight to the doors, to the public doors where people enter the lobby. That also obviously provides him with a clear line of fire at anyone who comes into the business. Prior to the police arriving, there's an employee, and you'll see her in the videos that I'm going to show. who was having a conversation with Mr. Stacy. He remained armed during the entire time. He was calm. He wasn't acting unusually, other than he brought a gun into a business and fired a round into the ceiling, but wasn't acting unusually other than that. Of interest was that Mr. Stacy had told her that, quote, it was just too much. When asked if he had sought help for recent suicidal thoughts, he said that he had, but, quote, that it did not help. And when asked by her if he wanted to step outside, he told her, no, this is my plan. PSO Westrick was the first to arrive at the Biomet USA. He was not wearing a department-issued body-worn camera. He was not on duty at the time. He was scheduled to testify in court that day, so he was dressed in his police uniform, carrying all of his normal equipment, but was not wearing a body-worn camera pursuant to departmental policy. PSO Emily Weston was the second officer on the scene. She was on duty. She's wearing a department-issued body camera. That camera recorded the entirety of her actions in both audio and video. When she arrives at the scene, PSO Westrick was already at the door waiting for her to back him up. Together, they entered the Biomat business lobby. PSO Westrick entered first. Mr. Stacy is to his right, only a few steps away. There's a short wall that you walk past. It's about 3-4 feet, and then turn right. You're looking into the lobby area, and Mr. Stacy was only a few steps to PSO Westrick's right. He was ordered to drop his weapon. He didn't. Mr. Stacy raised his gun. He pointed it directly at PSO Westrick. There then was an exchange of gunfire between PSO Westrick and Mr. Stacy. PSO Westrick was struck by 3 bullets fired by Mr. Stacy. 2 of those bullets struck him in the lower abdomen on his right side. The 3rd bullet struck the holster that he was wearing, also on his right side. The 2 bullets that struck him in the abdomen were stopped by his bulletproof vest. Although the bullets were stopped by his vest, PSO Westrick was temporarily incapacitated by the blunt force trauma caused by being shot. He fell to the floor. When that happened, PSO Weston stepped forward into that spot where PSO Westrick had engaged Mr. Stacy. She looked around the corner of that wall, confirmed Stacy's location, again ordered him to drop his weapon, and then engaged Mr. Stacy in gunfire until the threat had been alleviated. During this incident, Mr. Stacy was struck by 4 bullets, as I said, 2 in the leg, 2 in the chest, fired by PSOs Westrick and Weston. As soon as the threat was alleviated, officers from the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, including Public Safety Officer Weston, began immediate life-saving efforts. Ambulance was called, first responders responded, other officers responded, everything possible was done. Unfortunately, Mr. Stacy died there at the scene. During this incident, there was a total of 27 rounds fired. 4 of those shots were fired by Mr. Stacy at the public safety officers. 10 shots were fired in response by Public Safety Officer Westrick, and 13 shots were fired by Public Safety Officer Weston. During the incident, Mr. Stacy fired 5 shots total, first one into the ceiling, and then 4 shots at PSOs Westrick and Weston, 3 of which hit Public Safety Officer Westrick. PSO Westrick was taken to Bronson Hospital immediately from this scene to be treated for injuries received during the incident. Thankfully, his bulletproof vest stopped the 2 bullets that hit him in the abdomen. Otherwise, we would have had much more serious injuries or worse to PSO Westrick. He received treatment for that blunt force injury caused by being shot and was released from the hospital. I told you that Westrick was shot in the gun belt or in the holster. This is his actual holster. You can see right here the entry of that bullet, and then here the damage caused by the bullet leaving his holster. Obviously his gun wasn't in it. Bullet went in, came out the back, that close to him. The vest that PSO Westrick was wearing was new. It had just been purchased by the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety for him. As it turns out, I learned today that this was the first day that this vest had been worn by PSO Westrick. It saved him great injury or worse. This is the vest. Here and here are the entrance holes from that vest. The vest stopped both of the bullets that otherwise would have struck PSO Westrick on March 12th. You can see on the other side of the vest that nothing made it through. Two here. Immediately after this incident, the Michigan State Police were contacted. Many of you will recognize Detective Lieutenant Chuck Christensen's name from the Michigan State Police. He's been used multiple times by agencies in Kalamazoo as well as around the state for investigating these types of incidents. We want to bring in a department that is not connected to the officers that were involved in order to look at all of the evidence. Chuck Christensen led the investigation that was conducted by the Michigan State Police. The evidence seized at the scene included PSO Westrick's gun, PSO Wesson's gun, Mr. Stacy's gun. As I said, that gun had 10 rounds left in the magazine plus one chambered. The magazine started with 16, he fired 5. There were 28 shell casings recovered at the scene. There was 22 fired bullets or bullet fragments recovered. In Mr. Stacy's car was a second fully loaded 16-round magazine and a box of 9mm ammunition containing 28 rounds. During the autopsy, one fired bullet was recovered from Mr. Stacy's chest. The two officers that were involved, Public Safety Officer Westrick and Public Safety Officer Emily Weston, are both assigned to the Operations Division. PSO Westrick has been with the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety since May of 2016, so almost 3 years. PSO Weston has been a member of the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety since May of 2018, just under 1 year. In any of these types of incidences, I begin looking at this when it happens. I go to the scene for my own impressions about what happened and about where it is from the scene. I review all of the reports that are prepared by every agency that's involved in the investigation. I review all of the evidence, all of the videos, any photographs, any diagrams, everything that is associated with the case, and did so again in this case. I review the law that is applicable to the police use of force, including any United States Supreme Court cases from the Federal 6th District, from the Michigan Court of Appeals, from the Michigan Supreme Court, and the jury instructions relative to self-defense and defense of others provided by the Michigan State Bar Association. The law in the state of Michigan is this: The police may use force, including deadly force, in the performance of their job. They may use that degree of force that is reasonable under the circumstances to effectuate an arrest. They may take reasonable action to protect themselves in the course of making an arrest. A person accused of a crime, including a police officer, may assert justification or self-defense in explaining their actions. In Michigan, any person may use deadly force to defend themselves or others under certain circumstances. To determine whether a person acted in lawful self-defense, their actions must be judged according to the circumstances that appeared to them at the time they acted. Deadly force is appropriate if a person has an honest and reasonable belief that they were in immediate danger of being killed or seriously injured. A belief of potential minor injury would not justify deadly force or seriously injuring another person. If the officer's belief was honest and reasonable, they can act at once to defend themselves, even if it turns out later they were wrong about the amount of danger they were in. Lastly, the actor must have an honest and reasonable belief that what they did was immediately necessary. In applying those laws to the facts of a particular situation, it's important to do so from the proper perspective. That perspective is provided by the United States Supreme Court in a case called Graham versus Connor, where they stated the reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, rather than with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. Police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. The actions of the police at the moment that Brandon Stacy pointed a gun at them and began firing must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. At that time, PSOs Westrick and Wesson had every reason to believe that the gun pointed at them was a semi-automatic handgun, that it was immediately capable of killing them, other officers, or other persons present. PSOs Westrick and Wesson each had an honest and reasonable belief that they and others were in immediate danger of serious injury or death. The action they took was immediately necessary to protect themselves and to protect others from that danger. The seriousness of the threat posed, the need for immediate action, and the reasonableness of that police action was further shown by the fact that PSO Westrick was shot multiple times by Mr. Stacy. For these reasons, it's my decision as prosecuting attorney for Kalamazoo County that Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety Officer Brendan Westrick and Public Safety Officer Emily Weston were justified in their use of deadly force to stop the immediate extreme threat that was posed by Brandon Alexander Stacy. As a result, no charges will be filed against either one of them. And I want you to see what they saw that day. This comes with a couple of caveats. One, what you're going to see is something that is, I think, emotional and triggering for some people. And it's difficult to watch in many respects. Two, it's been edited. The edits in it are obvious. A couple of them are simply from a time perspective. There's no reason for us to stand and watch the screen for 3 minutes while Mr. Stacy isn't in it because he's left the lobby and entered a bathroom area where there is no cameras. And the video, in the third video I'll show you, and I'll repeat it when we get there, has been edited because it shows visible evidence of Mr. Stacy being shot. If I continue the video, there's no reason for that. What's important is what led up to those actions of Public Safety Officer Westrick and Weston. And out of sense of sympathy for the victim's family, for Mr. Stacy's family, for the officers involved in this, and for the community. I've edited the video just so you know. This first video will show Mr. Stacy entering the lobby, coming here, going back out, and then standing here near this area until Officer Westrick and Wesson have entered the building. You'll see him pull his gun, fire into the ceiling, and then engage in conversation with an employee. That's Mr. Stacy. Edit number 1. That's him pulling the gun and firing it into the ceiling. If later you watch in the upper left, that window there, you'll see the police vehicle go from right to left, and then Officer Westrick go from left to right. Obviously, you saw the second jump in the video there. There's Westrick. As you can see, Mr. Stacy raised his weapon, put both hands on it, and it's pointed directly at Public Safety Officer Westrick, who's responding by trying to move back to a place of cover as they begin to exchange gunfire. This is from Public Safety Officer Emily Weston's body camera. We'll show her arriving at the scene, joining PSO Westrick at the doors to the lobby of the Biomat business, and then as they begin to go into the business itself.
I'm not sure what's going on. We've taken a couple of calls that there's at least 50 to 60 people still inside the building. And it was an ex-employee that had shot one shot in the air. I'm being advised that he is inside and he still has been on. Hold on, team. Can't roll at 26 right now. So keep the air open.
PSO Westrick was the first at the door. PSO Weston joined him. Officer Westrick said, "We're going inside." You can see both officers went in the business with their weapons drawn. On your left is the Biomat video. On your right is Emily Weston, PSO Emily Weston's body cam video. They've been synced so that you see both, from both perspectives, her body camera, what she was seeing, and from the biomat camera, looking back past Mr. Stacy. The video on the left will stop before the video on the right, because that's the right thing to do. And a word of caution, this is very graphic. PSOs Westrick and Weston responded to a call of shots fired where a person armed with a gun in a busy business in downtown Kalamazoo had fired one round. When they arrived at the scene, Mr. Stacy pointed his gun directly at PSO Westrick, began firing at the officers, striking one of them 3 times. The public safety officer's actions on March 12th they drive around in cars that say to protect and serve on the side, and that's exactly what they did here. Was they stepped into a situation that was extraordinarily dangerous. They placed their lives at risk in order to save other persons. There was nothing they could do but that. What happened was being driven by the actions of Mr. Stacy. Do you have any questions?
Jeff, can you tell me, between the 2 officers firing a certain amount of shots each, do you know specifically how many shots from one officer hit Mr. Stacy and how many shots from the other officer hit Mr. Stacy? Is that a detail you have?
It's a detail that I can figure out from the reports, but 3 of the shots were through and throughs. And so without being able to recover those actual bullets, it becomes more difficult. You know, the videos provide evidence of at least one of those shots that were fired. But in the end here, I don't think it's necessary in order to reach my conclusions to determine which officer fired which of the shots that struck Mr. Stacy.
And just kind of related on that, the threat was ongoing until that second officer also came in and fired shots also. So is that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, PSO Westrick was struck 3 times, temporarily disabled, went to the ground and moved out of the way. PSO Weston immediately stepped in. That threat was ongoing at the time. Mr. Stacy, as you can see from the video, actually moves himself to his right, which gives him a better angle at anyone who's trying to stay in cover, as PSO Weston was. He moved himself to a place where he had a better shot at her. Until he is completely disabled, which is on the ground and not holding that weapon, the officers and everyone else in that building remained at risk.
Thank you.
Do you have an approximate distance between them?
It's several steps. I didn't actually look at the diagram to tell you exactly, but they were within 15 feet of each other.
This may be a question you can't answer, but he purchased a firearm prior to showing signs of mental illness, before seeking help for suicidal thoughts, mental illness. If he had been going to see somebody about this, had displayed these signs, he probably wouldn't have been able to purchase a firearm? Or, I know, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I know where you're going. And when he purchased the gun in 2015, as I said, he has no prior criminal history. He had no prior criminal history in 2019 when this happened. So there isn't anything about that that would have prohibited him from purchasing a weapon. The fact that a person has even an ongoing or a diagnosed mental illness doesn't prohibit their ability to purchase a firearm. We talk about having been involuntarily committed in those records, the accessibility of those records in order to prohibit the purchase, but there was nothing that was going on at the time that should have alerted anyone about the sale of this weapon. And then his family, I thought, had acted appropriately in removing the weapon from his house, giving it to another family member for safekeeping, and that person had no idea this was going on March 12th, where I'm sure they wouldn't have provided the gun to Mr. Stacy.
So Stacy retrieved the gun from his family member
That
on
morning.
March 12th. Okay.
Yes, earlier that morning.
They
he-
had it in their safekeeping before then?
Yes. The last thing to do is to thank the Michigan State Police. They did an excellent job in investigating this case. All of the other departments that you see represented here, the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, Portage Department of Public Safety, Western Michigan University Police Department, the Kalamazoo Township Police Department, the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office. This community does a fantastic job supporting each other, supporting each other's law enforcement agencies. All of them responded to this scene, provided assistance at the scene or assistance in patrolling in the city as the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety was busy tending to their own. They provided assistance to the Michigan State Police in rounding up and questioning witnesses. We are very fortunate here in Kalamazoo County to have the commitment that we have from each of these agencies to each other, and it's been shown time and time again how much of a benefit that is. Anything else?
Can you just talk, you just kind of explained it too, but can you just talk about the job that the two officers did? Because I mean, just looking at the video, this could have been a lot worse. And we've seen, with us, we've seen stories all over the country, we've had our history here. I mean, can you just talk about like what they were able to do and how big of a deal that is to make sure that something bigger didn't happen?
Absolutely. You know, PSO Westrick, let's start with PSO Westrick wasn't on duty that day. He was scheduled to come and testify in court. When this 911 call comes out, he happens to be here downtown in Kalamazoo and the closest person available. He immediately responds to the call. When PSO Wesson is in her car, you can hear the communication that's going on, that there are dozens of people that are still in this building, that a man armed with a gun has come in and fired around, and the two of them are left alone outside the door. They're not waiting for, you know, the SWAT team to arrive. They're not waiting for overwhelming force from all of the rest of the departments that are responding. They're all on their way. But at that point in time, there's no waiting. You know, you can't. Who knows what's going to happen? There are multiple people that are inside that building that are donating blood. You know, they're hooked to a machine, and the biomed employees did a fantastic job in taking care of themselves, making sure other employees knew what was going on, hiding in a safe place. But they also did a fantastic job in making sure they were taking care of their customers in order to be able to get them to safety. But PSOs Weston and Westrick are there at the door, and you saw they acted without hesitation, and they placed their lives at risk in order to make sure that those other persons that were there were going to be protected. And it wasn't it wasn't this perceived threat. This was real. He was armed with a gun. He was willing to exchange gunfire with, engage in a gunfight with police. And even watching her fellow officer get shot immediately in front of her and go to the ground, PSO Weston then steps forward and puts herself in danger. She doesn't know if those bullets have been caught by the vest or not. She doesn't know what danger PSO Westrick is in, what the degree of injury he's facing. And rather than protect herself, she acted to protect everyone else in that business. Those officers exhibited incredible bravery.
We had heard rumors that Brandon Stacy tried to become a police officer, maybe failed out of police academy. Anything to that? And also, was there any evidence to suggest that he had it out against officers and wanted to kill cops or anything?
Nope, I'm not aware of any. I don't know whether or not any of that is true in terms of him having prior attempts to become involved with law enforcement. I know that he had previously worked for other first responders here in the Kalamazoo area. There was nothing in the reports that I read that suggested any animosity towards the police. The police were a tool here, and he was going to make sure that he did everything that was necessary for them to do what they did.
In talking about them being a tool to kind of facilitate what happened, is there talk of this being like officer-assisted suicide because he had mental health problems, or is that not what we're calling this?
I'm not going to call it anything. He stood there and pointed his gun at an officer and engaged in a gunfight. There is nothing you can't describe that as anything other than an attempt to injure or kill the police officers that responded to this scene. That's what he did. Their actions were in direct response to that. Whether he was, as he had previously spoken about, intending for his life to be taken, there's reason to believe that, but there are ways to do that without trying to kill someone else. If you want a copy of what's been shown here, a copy of the written opinion, there are Freedom of Information Act requests available. Sign them, they're already filled out, and you'll leave here with a DVD that has all of this information on it. Thank you very much.